If those bones stand up and follow us down to the beach, I'll be very surprised. But you know what? If they do, I'll deal with it." His words carved out their own patch of quiet in the rising wind. Among the men, a touching of talismans, some muttering. Ringil cut them a surreptitious glance, counting faces without seeming to. A couple of those he saw had been around when he took down the Kraken, but most were on the other ships at the time, or they were aboard Dragon's Demise, but in their bunks. It had been a filthy night anyway. Rain and howling wind, band light muffled up in thick, scudding cloud, and the encounter was over almost as soon as it began. All but a handful missed the action. They had reports from their comrades, of course, but Ringil couldn't blame them for doubting it. Killing a Kraken at the height and heart of an ocean storm by night? Yeah, right. It was a stock scene out of myth. A lantern-light story to frighten the cabin boy with. It was a fucking tale. It was 5 weeks now, and no one was calling him Dragonbane that he'd noticed. He supposed it was for the best. He'd held enough commands in the past to know how it went. Best not to disabuse your men of their tight-held notions, whatever those might be. That went in equal measure for those who doubted him and those who told tales of his prowess. The actual truth would probably scare both parties out of their wits, and that, right here and now, was going to be counterproductive. They were twitchy enough as it was. He faced them, put one booted foot on the forlorn, shin-high chunk of mossed-over granite that served the grave as marker. He pitched his voice for them all to hear, pearls of dark wisdom from the swordsman-sorcerer in your midst. "All right, people, listen up. Anyone wants to sprinkle salt, go right ahead, get it done. But if we stay here to fill this hole in, we're going to get drenched." He nodded westward, out to sea. It was not long past noon, but the sour afternoon light was already closing down. Clouds raced in from the north, boiling up like ink poured in a glass of water. Overhead, the sky was turning the black of a hanged man's face. Yeah, be calling that an omen before you know it. His mood didn't improve much on the way back to the boats. He took point on the meandering sheep track that brought them down off the cliffs, set a punishing pace over the yielding peaty ground. No one made the mistake of trying to stay abreast or talk to him. By way of contrast, there was raucous good cheer at his back. The Marines had loosened up with the permission to lay wards. Now they tramped boisterously along behind him, good-natured bickering and jeering in the ranks. It was as if they'd poured out their misgivings with all the salt from their tooled leather bags, left it all behind them in the tiny white traceries they'd made, which Ringil supposed they had, and wasn't that the whole point of religion anyway? But he was honest enough to recognize his own released tension as well, because, despite all the other pointless, empty graves, despite his own increasingly solid conviction that they were wasting their time, he too had gone up to those cliffs, expecting a fight. Wanting a fight. Little vestiges of the feeling still quivered at the nape of his neck and in his hands. Enough to know it had been there, even if he hadn't spotted it at the time. Last resting place of the Illwrack Changeling. Again. This being the 9th last resting place to date. The 9th grave of the legendary Dark King they'd dug up, only to find the detritus of common mortality beneath. Has to be an easier way to do this shit. Really, though, there wasn't, and he knew it. They were all strangers here, including himself. Oh, he'd read about the Huronish Isles in his father's library as a boy, learned the arid almanac facts from his tutors, and growing up in Trelane he'd known a handful of people who'd spent time there in exile. But this was not knowledge with practical application, and anyway it was decades out of date. Fluent Naomic aside, he had no useful advantage over his fellow expedition members. Meanwhile, Anasharal the helmsman, full of ancient unhuman knowing when they planned the expedition back in Shelteth last year, was now proving remarkably cagey about specifics. The Kiriath demon was either unwilling or unable to point them with any clarity to the changeling's grave, and instead suggested, somewhat haughtily, that they do the legwork themselves and inquire of the locals. "I fell from on high for your benefit," was the habitual gist of the lecture. "Is it my fault that I no longer have the vision I gave up in order to bring my message to you? I have steered you to journey's end. Let human tongues do the rest."